In case you haven't heard, there will be a solar eclipse tomorrow. Yeah, I know, it's news to me too. It's one of those rare cosmic events that still manages to capture our imagination. And it makes us marvel at the beauty of creation and the movement of the heavenly bodies. The moon will slowly make its way in front of the sun, turning midday into night, and then slowly move away again, as the sun's glorious light returns. It promises to be an awe-inspiring sight, and I hope, weather permitting, that we will be able to witness it. Since the dawn of time, we have always been dependent on that light. We needed light to find nourishment and to keep ourselves safe from predators. And it's because of that some of our earliest ancestors worshipped the sun as a god, the giver of light. They held rituals and made sacrifices in a plea for its daily cycle of return. But when that light is extinguished in the middle of the day, well, that was surely an omen of some calamity or disaster that was soon to befall them. And as we got older, our knowledge of the cosmos became more understanding. We began to understand it more. Humans realized that the solar eclipse was just merely the moon passing in front of the sun and the moon's shadow falling onto the earth. Even centuries before the time of Christ, we were able to predict when these events would happen. This knowledge, however, didn't make these occurrences any less dramatic, nor any less fearful. When the light that rules the day is suddenly extinguished, well, it reminded us of our own weaknesses and reinforced our dependence on that light. Of course, today we no longer fear solar eclipses as harbingers of disaster, and instead we are able to appreciate the glorious majesty of the event. But there is another eclipse that we are facing today in this world. And it's not as beautiful, and sadly, it is not as rare. It's when the light of truth is being obscured, brought about by the evil and sin in this world. Hatred, violence, injustice, threatening to extinguish God's light to the point where it is becoming more and more difficult to see the truth. In our gospel today, Jesus offended the Pharisees by pointing out that their judgment had been clouded, had been eclipsed. They considered themselves righteous because they followed the letter of the law. They ate the right food. They engaged in the right cleaning rituals. They worshiped in the right way. But the others, the ones who don't eat the food that we eat, that don't engage in these rituals, that don't worship as we do, they're the ones who are defiled. They're unclean. But Jesus says, no, your thinking is backwards. It's not what goes in the mouth that defiles. Nothing, not anything outside of a person can make someone unclean unless it finds a home within the heart. To eat with unwashed hands does not defile, but gluttony does. To eat with sinners does not defile, but self-righteousness does. The things that come out of the mouth, how one speaks and relates to others, flows from the heart. And when the heart is filled with evil intentions, when sin is allowed to eclipse that light, that is when one becomes defiled. Now, it's also important to note what Jesus is not saying. He's not opening the door to an overly permissive lifestyle, to permit wrongdoing just because those external matters don't matter, that they don't defile. And quite to the contrary, there are evil forces in this world. Forces that must be condemned. Forces that must be resisted. But it is how we allow those forces to affect us that leads it to defilement and makes it harder for the truth to shine forth. And yet the Pharisees still did not understand. And Jesus said they were the blind leading the blind, lost in their own darkness. And the disciples too failed to understand. And we can almost hear Jesus slapping his forehead with his palm when he says, "Do you not understand?" And he would find out if his message was received as they crossed over into the land of the Gentiles. There they were met by a woman who, by all accounts, would be considered unclean by the Jewish leaders. And I imagine the Syrophoenician woman probably believed that herself, that she was defiled. And she was probably told that her daughter's illness was punishment for her sins, for the woman's own sins. She was living in darkness, but she was fighting to find a way into that light. Suddenly, she sees Jesus, a sliver of sunlight peeking around the eclipse in her heart. And she cries out, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David, for my daughter is tormented by a demon." And what was Jesus' response? Silence. We're told he did not answer her at all. He kept her in suspense, in the shadow of her own despair. Why? Why would he do this? Some scholars say that in silence, Jesus searches our hearts, trying to find a way through that eclipse, and in doing so is much more potent than speech. I think that's probably true. He was peering into the heart of this woman to gauge her sincerity and her faith. But I think there was another reason why Jesus fell silent. I think he was waiting to see how the disciples would react, to see if they had finally understood the lesson that he was teaching earlier, or if they still held to the prejudices of the Pharisees. And how did they respond? "Send her away. This unclean Gentile woman is not worthy of our attention." But Jesus heard something else, actually, in the woman's plea. She did not come up and say, "Lord, heal my daughter," as if she was claiming her own righteousness. No. She approached with, "Have mercy on me." She begged for forgiveness, for redemption, for mercy, on the off chance that just maybe that might help heal her daughter. And at this point, Jesus and the woman engaged in a wonderful back and forth that I think was actually meant for the disciples to hear and to witness. Jesus echoed what the disciples were thinking, saying, "She is not his problem. He was sent to the lost sheep of Israel." But then in her desperation, she falls to her knees, humbling herself before him and begging for mercy. And Jesus then followed with a parable, a statement that reflected the attitudes of the religious leaders. It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And we know the disciples have never been very good at understanding Jesus' parables. But the Syrophoenician woman, she did. She understood what Jesus was saying, and she responded with a parable of her own. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. She admitted that she was not worthy of eating the food from the table, but she would so humbly and gratefully accept any small scrap that might be offered from the Lord. And with that phrase, you could see Jesus light up and say, "Woman, great is your faith." And her daughter was healed instantly. Jesus saw that she understood what the Pharisees and the disciples did not. And so the darkness in her heart was chased away so that she might live in the full light of truth. There's one other thing about solar eclipses I want to let you know, that the only reason why we're able to experience it is because of our particular place in the solar system. The moon is 400 times smaller than the sun. And it is also 400 times closer than the sun. That makes it appear as if the sun and the moon are exactly the same size. And that's how it is also with evil and sin in this world. Because of our perception, they appear to be the same size. But the truth is, God's love, God's light, is immensely bigger. We're just able to hide it. When we witness the solar eclipse tomorrow, we need to take a moment to think about those things in our own heart that blocks out the light of Christ. And we need to think about our desperate need for redemption in order that we may see the truth. But at the same time, I want you also to enjoy the event. Bask in the beauty of this rare occasion and savor the majesty of these two heavenly bodies engaged in this celestial ballet. It is a beautiful sight. It is the wonder of creation. And through it, we can catch a glimpse of God's glory. And in the word of the psalmist that we just sang a few moments ago, may God be merciful to us and bless us. Show us the light of his countenance and come to us. Amen.